What's up everybody, it's Pavise back again with another Fire Emblem Engage video. A ton of new information just dropped as the preview window is now open for the press, and to discuss all the latest news and give our impressions and expectations, we've got Mekkah joining us. Welcome Mekkah, how you doing?
Hello, doing great. Being curious. These reviews are interesting. It's like I'm not even sure what to think yet. I'm just like, now I really want to play the game to see what they mean when they say all these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I saw these previews, or I watched a lot of them. The general impression from all of them was very positive. A lot more positive than I was expecting from these previews. I just want it in my hands. I honestly can't wait for it to come out because I just want to play it so bad.
Yeah, I just want to get my hands on to see exactly what they mean when they say something like it's more focused on the military side of things. I'm sure you've read the same review. It's more focused on the gameplay. A lot of the impressions that people have gotten, I think, is okay, the gameplay is going to be good and the story is going to be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's going to be a story and there will be characters that sometimes talk to each other. Okay, cool.
Yeah, the story in my mind is already somewhat a lost cause, and stuff they showed in here pretty much just cemented that in my mind, that I'm not going to go into this game expecting anything from the story, and I'm just going to try to have fun with the gameplay and characters. I think the characters, and a lot of previews mention this too, a lot of the characters and the supports are still there's still a bit more beef to them, but that the story they're in is a bit more simple. And, I don't really mind that. I know a lot of people probably coming from Three Houses might be disappointed in that, but I'm just going to kind of take the story in stride. It seems like it's going to be more of like a, lighthearted romp style story than it's going to be anything about the moral gray areas of war,
Yeah. I'm curious, where did you get the impression that the characters are going to be, I think, what was the wording you used? There's more meat to them? Because the impression I got from reading reviews was that the characters were going to be very 1/2 note. Like they'll have one hobby and then their second character trait is that they'll praise the main character, and that's about it. That's what I've read in some reviews. Like there was a tidbit somewhere. Someone said it was like 10-second supports, which is a lot shorter than what we usually get with full voice acting.
Yeah, it might have been just one or two previews I read where they mentioned that the supports are where there's mainly character stuff going on and not the main story. But 10-second supports, that sounds more like the Engage support stuff. But I could be wrong.
It could be the guy was confusing the supports for the Engage rings conversations or whatever that was.
Because I know those are short.
The case as well. Yeah,
those are short. Even if the supports are a bit shorter than usual, I don't think I'll mind that much. Mainly because even with the characters, I just think I guess similar mindset with the story. I'm going in to have fun with them, if that makes sense. I'm not expecting any crazy complexities. Even if they do just bare standard characters well, I'm one of the few who actually has I actually kind of like the designs. I like the campy and kind of wild direction that they went in. So I'll be satisfied even if they don't go, I guess, too deep into these characters. I guess the main takeaway here for me is at least the story is I'm not expecting anything. I'm just going to have fun with it. If the story does something crazy, I'm just going to roll with it and just have fun with it.
Yeah, for me, that's how I go into it as well. I'll just have low expectations with regards to depth and everything like that in the story. It will be okay, I'll be very surprised if the story at any point surprises me. That's fine, I guess. I would have liked more, but if I expect more, I'm just going to be let down, so I'll just roll what we got. With the supports, I will add one thought that I'm curious if you agree with. I might have said the 10-second supports as a negative sounding thing. I actually don't think that's bad, a short support. If anything, I kind of want that, because I don't know if you have the same impression, but when you play Three Houses and you unlock 15,000 C supports after one battle, you have to go through them all listening to all the voice acting, especially if you're doing a Let's Play like me, it's so long and tedious. So I'm honestly kind of on board with shorter supports if they are like that in the game. I'm actually kind of curious if they can make a better system out of shorter supports, because honestly, as good as Three Houses supports can get sometimes, they are very, very long sometimes, and I would rather keep up the pace a little bit, which might jive well with the general feeling that a lot of reviewers have, where the in-between battle section is shorter than it was with the monastery in Three Houses. Somniel is apparently very short, and if the supports are also short, that kind of makes sense as well, I think.
Yeah, that checks out for me too in terms of having shorter supports. Like, I don't mind that either. Three Houses, I think I'd agree with that sentiment of some of those supports are pretty long, especially back to back to back to back to back. So yeah, I don't mind the shorter support style either. I think like you're saying, in terms of a pacing thing, it would fit, or it seems like it would fit nicely with an Engage. Speaking of supports, I don't know how much you care about this, but it seems from what we know, no S supports.
Yeah, a lot of people are really curious about that.
Yeah, for me, I personally, I'm gonna miss them a bit. It's another part of the game. I mean, what? They had them in Three Houses. I don't think they had them in Echoes because it didn't exist. Fate's Awakening. So this will be the first Fire Emblem game, or new Fire Emblem game, or non-remake Fire Emblem game in a while to not have them. But I don't know if that's something you even care about. Are you gonna mourn their loss?
I'm not going to pretend that I'm super into the shipping community for Fire Emblem. It's definitely one of my lower priorities. But I will say that just because the support thing doesn't show an S, and just because there is no indication that there's S supports, doesn't mean they're not there. Or that there's nothing equivalent. Because, for example, if you look at how Three Houses did it, I don't remember if Fs even showed in the support list. I think it did, because that's how we knew who was gay and who wasn't. But they know their fan base at this point. At least they'll know they like shipping. I mean, they made Awakening, then they made Fates, and then they remade SOV. Sure, that one doesn't have it. And then they made Three Houses, which has an extra mechanic-ish, where like at the end of the game you choose someone to be with, and you have the Goddess Tower scene. So I'd be very surprised if there wasn't anything like S supports. Just because S supports are not in the game doesn't mean that they don't have some kind of reward if you have an A support with someone. If I recall, actually, if you remember in Three Houses, the way they did quote-unquote S supports between characters that are not Byleth, they would have two characters. It was a very weird system. They would have two characters, and if they had an A support and they reached that before other characters, so if they had more support points into their A supports than others, even though they were capped out, it's very strange, I know, they would then get a paired ending. And depending on who was further in, would prioritize who gets the paired ending, if you know what I mean. Do you know what I'm referring to? Because I might be explaining it very
I know what you're referring
to. Yeah, okay. So they had a pairing system for characters, even though there was no S supports. So that's why I think there might be conversations, extra scenes, stuff like that for two paired characters. And I definitely think they'll do something for Aldir. Like, I'd be very surprised if they didn't. But the fact that there's no revelation about the S support surprises me a bit, because it would be very marketable for people who are into that stuff. So I'm not sure why they didn't show any of that.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning again that these previews only went up to Chapter 8, right? Like,
yes.
We only saw, or they're only allowed to show, or even talk about. I know a few previewers mentioned this, where there's things they wanted to talk about they just couldn't talk about. Because they can only go up to stuff in Chapter 8 and stuff Nintendo said they can and can't talk about. So what we've seen still, even of this big chunk of the game, is still only at the beginning. So there is definitely still possibilities for things we don't see to still be in there. So yeah, maybe S supports are in there. For me, it's not a major loss if they're gone. I don't mind that much. I personally did like them, but I think there's enough in here already for me to get excited about that I wouldn't mind if they are gone. And like you said, they'll probably do something, even if there's no S supports, they'll probably do some pairing thing or pairing endings. Yeah, that sounds pretty likely.
Yeah, for everyone who was more into it than me, I hope they're in there. But personally, for me, it's not a big loss. Another
difference, I guess, from Three Houses now is seems like we've got pretty good confirmation that there's not going to be any route splitting, which is, in my opinion, really good. I know there's a bit of debate around route splitting in terms of how it actually affects story quality. And in this case of this game, I was already having my expectations for the stories not high anyways, as we talked about earlier.
They might as well have a route splitting, right?
Yeah.
They might as well have been a route split.
Personally, I'm glad that it's not in this game. After having route splitting in Fates and Three Houses, I just want to sit down and play a game from start to finish without having to replay in terms of just for different routes and to see everything. Like, I'm glad that they're switching back to at least for this game, for a single route. I think it'll be a lot more focused and easier to play, because I never finished Three Houses because of the route splitting. I just could not get through every route because of how long it took, especially with how that game was structured with the monastery at the beginning.
Yeah, and with how repetitive Three Houses is, even though there's 4 different routes, it's not helping in that regard. And this is definitely a step in the right direction for them. I hate that phrase, but it works here. Or rather, it's a step back to how they used to do things. I like that. The one advantage to route splitting, I think, is that it does add replayability. I am struggling to think of a reason to replay this game if it is what it looks like, which is just one fun campaign and you're kind of done. Like, I guess you could play on a higher difficulty, or maybe a lower difficulty, or do some challenge runs. But the one advantage to route splitting is that you can have some replayability. And what I'm hoping for, maybe they'll do, you know how in Echoes you have that route split at some point where you can either fight Somniel or Dinas as one chapter? They could do that on a world map in Engage, and that would be a very cool callback to a previous game, which, you know, Engage is all about. So that might be a fun way to implement a little route split. But I'm happy with the whole game as a whole, just being about one thing. The other advantage, I guess, for marketing is that, or the advantage for route split is of course marketing, because it's fun to divide your fans into tribes who start fighting each other over who picked what starter, basically, except for the Fire Emblem equivalent. That's another advantage, and because they didn't market it like that initially, I was pretty sure there was not going to be a route split, but I'm glad to have it confirmed not be in.
Yeah, speaking of difficulty, I heard a lot of previewers mention that they were finding this game fairly easy, at least in the early game. Now, different previewers are going to be playing on different difficulties. I think the previewer I heard this was playing on hard mode. Like, they were playing on hard difficulty and they were finding it pretty easy. I might have misremembered this, but people were saying multiple times they were having, or that they weren't facing many problems beating chapters, but that they didn't mind at that point because it's early in the game. And Fire Emblem, well, it depends on the Fire Emblem game, but generally Fire Emblem, in terms of early games, isn't that difficult in the first place, unless we're talking like maybe Radiant Dawn, but that's more of an exception than the rule. Generally, Fire Emblem early games, in my experience, are usually not that difficult anyway.
As long as you're not on the highest difficulty, yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
As long as you're not on, like, Lunatic or Lunatic Plus, and you're just starting out, which we do have from the start in this game. And maybe that's a sign where maybe some more experienced players might just want to start on that instead of just hard, based on what we're hearing. But again, it's only the first 8 chapters. But I know this has been an ongoing conversation in terms of the amount of power the player has on player phase with all their engage emblems and break and all those mechanics. And it seems like in the early game, from the previews, it sounds like that's leading into a lower amount of difficulty. But also, I feel like that's maybe jumping the gun because we haven't seen this game's full hand in terms of how it's going to challenge later in the game. So I was wondering, after hearing what the previewer said about the difficulty, if that changed your thoughts on the difficulty or your perceptions of how this is going to actually play out in that way.
It's really made me think about what I want to do for my first playthrough. Thankfully, we have Mila's Divine Pulse, Dragons, Reverse, whatever you want to call
Crystal,
it.
I think, in this game.
Okay, well, I'll try to call
it the
Time
thingamajig.
Crystal then.
It does the thing.
Yeah, the thingamajig that reverses the turns. That really changes how difficulties work, and I'm flip-flopping between hard and lunatic for my first playthrough. It will be Let's Played on my channel, and so on one hand, I don't want it to be super tedious because that will make my videos a little boring to watch. And on the other hand, if you play on hard and it turns to be too easy, it's kind of a downer as well because everything just turns into a go burst simulator, which is also not very fun.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, it will probably be normal and lunatic, or normal, hard, and lunatic, kind of like how Awakening does it, or Three Houses does it. The usual division is like normal is for people who are new to Fire Emblem in general and just want to get the hang of things. So the enemies are just, if you know what you're doing even a little bit, the enemies just kind of roll over and die if you look at them funny.
Yeah.
And then you have hard, where it's a little bit of a step up, and it's good for like people who already know Fire Emblem, but they just don't want to have too tough of a time, or people who are kind of new to Fire Emblem, but they might know other strategy RPGs maybe. It's probably a good way to put it. Three Houses was like, once you knew what you're doing, hard was even too easy for most people, I found.
Yeah.
And then you have Lunatic, which is generally the, like, okay, if you come in here, you have to know what you're doing, and it's going to feel a bit unfair, at least until you get the hang of things, and then you might be able to break the game, or it might still be very hard all the way through. And that last part is probably what I want to play. I think I can handle it between the Time Crystal, my own experience, my co-host experience. But I'm a little worried about Lunatic because past Fire Emblem games have not been very nice with these modes, especially on a first playthrough. I wouldn't want to go into, say, Awakening Lunatic Blind or Three Houses Maddening Blind without knowing what I'm doing. That's what I'm a little scared of. Like, those have, like, ambush reinforcements and stuff. That's not something I want to deal with. So it might feel safer to start on hard for me. So I'm a little, like going back and forth. But I am glad we get all these options at the start, and I am glad that we get to play around. Hopefully we get to change it mid playthrough. In case you picked the wrong one. I've heard a lot of people starting a playthrough on the wrong difficulty, not being able to change it in some older games, and I hope for those people that they can change it. And with regards to the reviewers and how they found the difficulty, we might not have read all the same reviews. What I saw was one guy going, and I thought this comment was very interesting. I wish I remember which review it was from. The guy said, okay, so I play this game and it might feel like the engage rings would make things very easy, but because the enemies have access to some rings as well, and because the enemies are made, or the map is made with those in mind, it didn't feel that overpowered. And well, first of all, I'm just wondering, like, how can you design a map that can deal with these engage powers? They seem way too powerful. If they found a way to balance it, I'm very curious how they did that. Like, do you think that's even possible? Have a map deal with these engage powers?
Maybe. I think the difficulty is going to be very interesting with this game, because from what we've seen of the gameplay, you're going to be able to build some absolute units. Like, you're going to have some crazy stuff in this game in terms of what is possible for you to make your unit do and its capabilities. I think probably more than any other Fire Emblem game, at least from what we're seeing, the potential for your units in this game seems way higher than your average Fire Emblem game. So how they deal with that, or if they're able to, we'll see. Because usually, from what I've seen in the gameplay, it's usually a boss or an enemy or two that has a ring, versus you and your army.
Yeah, because you get like 12 rings at some point, right? So
yeah, so I think they'll maybe have to try to find another way to balance around that, because I don't think they're going to be able to match 1-for-1 in terms of the power of the units. They'll have to try to find other ways to get that difficulty up. I've heard a few comments about the AI using the break system intelligently.
That's true.
So maybe through the AI and their decision making, they can maybe ramp the difficulty up than usual. But then changing Fire Emblem AI is a interesting thing, because dealing with Fire Emblem AI is one of the primary things you're dealing with when you're making your strategy in terms of its behavior and how it acts. So that could really also, along with the introduction of these new mechanics, the way the AI interacts with these new mechanics will also probably change a bit of the strategy of what's going into this. I'll be very interested to see how this plays out. I'm probably going to start on hard difficulty just to see, and then if it turns out easy, I'll try harder difficulty another time. I do think, though, other Fire Emblem games have the ability to change the difficulty down, right?
I forgot the difficulty. I forgot the details on that front, but I do know that in Three Houses, I think between battles and in Fates, you can definitely change it down in Fates.
Yeah, you can change
it back up there. That's true. Yes, I know that much. So it is possible sometimes. Hopefully, they'll just give us maximum flexibility. If the ROM hacking community can do it, then I think they can do it too.
Yeah, for sure.
And I have one more follow-up question if we're not going long already. How would you change the AI to like make the game more interesting here? Because I can't come up with anything that's not already kind of in there. Like using the break system intelligence to me that sounds like, okay, they'll look for weapon triangle advantage, but they've already been doing that. They already do that in past games. So do we just prioritize that over everything? Is there anything else they could do? Because I can't come up with anything either. That's the problem.
Off the top of my head, thinking about it, you're right. They already do target weapon triangle advantage.
Oh, I got one thing they could do. If they have a ring, they could use it intelligently to like teleport units in a very inconvenient way for you. For example, like if you're fighting against Celica's ring, they can teleport a strong unit near your frail units. That could be one thing, I guess, that they're referring to.
I think even the enemies maybe behaving the same way will lead to maybe different behaviors, though. Because break status effect leads to, being unable to counterattack. I think units, in terms of the AI targeting, will be very interesting in terms of how it goes over the course of a turn. Because, if break status effects are happening on a somewhat regular basis, that will change how the enemy behaves, even with their current AI. So we'll see how that plays out in practice. I'm very interested about break, in terms of how it actually changes the gameplay.
Same.
Because old weapon triangle in comparison to this is, at least on first glance, is nothing. Like, this is a huge change that they're making to the weapon triangle, and I'm very interested to see how it plays out in practice. And like, based on the previews, it's one of those things where usually the people in the press who are playing are usually not the type who are going to push the system to the limit, right? They're more of a casual audience, right? Yeah. They're just going to play with it, and they're not going to try to really push it to the limit. And a lot of these things in this game get me excited, but a bit worried that if they do get pushed to the limit and optimized, that this game will explode.
Oh, yeah, this game will be broken to pieces with all the tools the player gets, especially break. Like, from what I'm imagining, boss fights will be very weird if you could just break the boss's weapon and then hit him with whatever you have for as hard as you want without facing a counterattack.
There probably will be anti-break skills on bosses, yeah. Something like the gambits, right? Like in Three Houses, there was anti-gambit stuff, right?
Yeah, good points. Three Houses bosses were, I think, notoriously hard to gambit because they had higher charm than most enemies, so you couldn't just, negate most of their stats by gambiting them. The other thing, I guess, if there's like a threatening enemy that's not necessarily a boss, you could very easily deal with them with the break mechanic, I imagine. But this is all, like, obviously all this is speculation, but this specifically is very speculative because we don't really know the exact scenarios you'll find yourself in and how abusable this is.
One thing I also wanted to talk about was this new class system where characters have natural proficiencies and can gain proficiencies, and that changes what classes are available to them. It's kind of like a fusion of a few class systems where, like, because in, like, I don't know, in Awakening or Fates, you had access to lots of classes off the jump no matter what, and you just had to build up their kind of weapon rank if you want to actually use them properly. Whereas here, it seems like the classes are actually locked behind having a proficiency that's needed in order to be able to change the class. Like, you've got Hero Advanced, one with a lance. You got Hero C, one with axes here, right? Like, same class, but different weapon variants that are available, I guess, based on, which means different units will have different access. It's just an interesting system that it's another thing where I'm like, I want to play with this.
Yeah, same. I'm super curious how it will play out. It will let you build units, like absolute units, like you said earlier, because I think those classes come with skills that they can get, and so you can make like super optimized builds like that. I gotta admit, I'm not the biggest fan of class hopping in Fire Emblem and implementing skills everywhere. I think it makes the game a bit less accessible for me personally, because I have to keep too much stuff in mind when it comes to skill management. I prefer it when it's more straightforward and math. Than all the extra skill stacking, stat stacking that goes on with Skill Emblem. I'd like a bit of customization. I think Fates had it almost perfectly, where you have some classes off the rip, like you said, and then you can get some from like befriending other characters or marrying other characters, and then on top of that, there's some other ways to get extra classes, I think. But generally speaking, you had a limited but pretty wide pool of classes available, and you can toy around with like that. The upside to this system, which reminds me a lot of Three Houses, is that you can try out a class. If you don't like it, you can go into something else. That's pretty hard to do in Fates without incurring a pretty big cost to your resources. So that's an advantage, I guess, that I do like. But it also seems... The other part of reclassing I don't really like is that it takes away a bit of individuality from units. I feel like classes, especially starting classes, are such a big part of a unit's personality. Like, Lowen is a cavalier, that's what he's known for being. So if you just change him to a fighter, a big part of his identity is lost. And that's the way I feel about a lot of Fire Emblem characters. So hopefully that won't get in the way in Engage. I won't know until I've seen it, but that's generally why I prefer a more limited or non-existent reclass system. But like everything else, I'm open to new things. So if this turns out to be really fun, I'm just gonna be very happy about it. And I'm curious to see what we can do with this.
I think the proficiencies is probably where they're trying to go with that, trying to give a bit more individuality in terms of those natural proficiencies. But at the same time, it's like, it depends how easy those proficiencies are to gain. Like, if you can get them from emblems, we know that, in terms of inheriting them. But if there's more ways to get lots of proficiencies, and then all of a sudden, maybe, like, individuality might just get lost in the sea of proficiencies that you gain that allow crazy flexibility. But I kind of hope that those natural proficiencies, like you say, kind of maybe put you on a bit of a track of what's possible, rather than opening up infinite possibilities of switching around and, like you're saying, just picking up skills and just going over the place. Because I agree that it does kind of water down characters' individuality in terms of the gameplay.
One thing I am worried about when it comes to a class system like this is it tends to amplify problems with class balancing. I think this was a big problem for Three Houses especially, where some classes were just very far above the rest. And so the characters, if you wanted to use them without feeling bad about them, like without feeling like they were bad units, it was kind of all about how well do they perform in the best classes in the game and how quickly can you build them there. So for example, if a character had like an axe boon or a flying boon, that was good because they can become wyverns very easily. And the other flip side is that the funny thing I guess you can do always in Three Houses, and maybe in this game as well, is like, oh, I'm going to build a character that's not their proficiency, like I'm going to make a Lysithea into an axe user or something like that, which is, it's funny for a little bit, but all you're getting is just more, you have to put more effort into making them that class, because not having a boon in a stat basically just meant I have to put more tutoring into them. It takes them longer to get there. It wasn't really very fun to do. It just took longer and their stats ended up worse. It didn't really feel like you were making a gimmick build. You would just feel like you were making a normal build, but it took longer to get. It took more effort, more resources, and more pain. So I hope that there's some kind of reward. Ideally, all these classes are somewhat equally viable and characters have individual qualities that make them stand out in some way in each class. Obviously, it can't be all characters stand out in all classes, but hopefully there's a lot of reasons to have a varied army. That's what I'm hoping for. That's the most important part to me, actually.
Yeah, and there's some cool classes here I want to try too. I think what's the Wolf Rider class? I want to see how that plays out.
Oh yeah.
Return of the Griffin classes from Awakening, I think, they're back too. I want to be able for those to have a place in the army, right, and not just like you're saying, that variety, and like not just having the variety in the first place, and also having that variety, be a key part of your army, or actually have people play a role in all those different classes. That is the ideal world. But this game already looks like a balancing nightmare. We had the class system on top of this. You've got even more to consider in terms of balancing this game. Luckily, I think in favor of, the balancing kind of discussion, it seems like they've had a lot more time with this game than a lot of previous games in terms of the polishing phase. At least visually, the game looks very polished. And I get the impression they've had a lot of time with it. So hopefully with that increased time, they've had the chance to really dig into the balancing and try to get it right.
Yeah, I do wonder, because they were going to release the game a lot earlier than they ended up doing, but they got delayed by the pandemic, I think. But you do got to wonder if that time actually went to balancing the game, or if they didn't just move on to the next project instead. We'll never know those kind of things, probably, unless they say it in an interview. I know for Three Houses, there was like one developer interview where they said, yeah, we didn't really play test manning, we just played it on casual mode to see if it didn't break or something, and that was kind of it. That has me a little worried, but that was Koei Tecmo talking, I think. I don't think Koei Tecmo is involved here, are they?
No, they're not listed. I think the development partner here, I might be wrong on this, I think it's Studio Gust.
Oh yeah, people have been saying that, yeah.
Because the visual style, a lot of the visuals are Studio Gust. The character designer is one who works with Gust a lot. And you know what? Speaking of the visuals here, I really think these visuals are a big step up over Three Houses. Not just in terms of art style. Art style I can see people not liking, but just in terms of the visual quality. I think I was watching the Digital Foundry preview, in terms of where they look at technically how the game is performing and just the general graphical quality. And I don't know how people can look at Three Houses and say it looks better than this game. I honestly can't, at least in terms of graphical quality.
Have you seen that take?
I've had it in my comments once or twice.
Oh no. Oh no. Please make sure to put on your glasses before you watch the screen.
Again, art style, I get it. Not everybody likes the art style, but I think this is the best looking 3D Fire Emblem game. Like, I don't think it's even close. The animations look fluid. At least this has anti-aliasing, at least, with Three Houses didn't on multiple areas. Like, the characters of Three Houses had no anti-aliasing, so they just look like jagged, like, blobs of pixels, and it's just noisy and
Yeah, don't forget the marketplace apples.
The texture quality is also a lot higher in this game, or at least it's a more unified art direction. it's a visually consistent and pleasing image that looks good, and the animations also look great. I think this game, in my opinion, is the best looking 3D Fire Emblem game we've gotten, even if with the art style debate and discussion. So I'm more than happy with the visuals of this game, especially compared to Three Houses. I really don't like how that game looks at all.
I think I'm mostly in agreement with you. I think the animations are very flashy. They seem very clean. I like a lot of vocabulary that you have about graphics and visual design and everything, because English is not my first language and I'm not super big on tech. But generally, what I can say is what I see is generally what I like. In a discussion, I can separate the art style from the animations, generally speaking, pretty well. I do gotta wonder if Alir's hair is not gonna distract me from the good animations at some points, or like some of the other designs I'm not a big fan of. But yeah, I do really appreciate the work that has clearly been put in to polish this game. Hopefully I won't get tired of them, because I feel like if you look at Fire Emblem animations for like a long time, then eventually it'll wear off. But I think at the very least, when it's new, I'm definitely gonna enjoy looking at all these animations for the first time. It's definitely a very cool time to be a Fire Emblem fan when a new game comes out and everything is just... Even just using a normal iron weapon is like cool, then you know you're having a good time.
Yeah, I think, first time or first couple of playthroughs you keep them on, but I think most Fire Emblem players at some point reach the animations off phase of their life, you know?
Yeah, hopefully we get options to turn them off and then completely off, you know what I mean? Like map animations, no animations, that'd be sick. How annoying are you gonna be when if you can't turn them off? Or like if they do the Pokemon thing where you can't turn them off, or if you're about to engage and you have to watch that like 10-second cutscene every time you do it. But at least Fire Emblem was pretty good about letting you skip everything you want to with the start button in most recent games, so I'm not super worried on that front.
Yeah, you'll at least be able to skip it even if you can't outright turn it off. So another thing that came up in the previews is and something I think we had slight confirmation on before, just looking at the menus, is weapon durability being gone. I don't know how you feel about weapon durability and how it plugs into Fire Emblem. I personally am glad it's gone. I don't really like working with weapon durability with Fire Emblem. Usually when I play Fire Emblem, the decisions around weapon durability are usually not fun to me, and they're more annoying than they are interesting and compelling. So I'm glad that weapon durability is gone. My one concern is that maybe this will also lead to more balancing issues. Just no weapon durability in combo with the rest of this game, I think, could lead to maybe some, again, like I'm saying, balancing issues in terms of just, I don't know, just making some weapons and some combinations too strong and you can just use them infinitely. Whereas with weapon durability, you put somewhat of a cap on that, but even then in Fire Emblem, there's a lot of ways to circumvent weapon durability. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, because your thoughts on that are probably at a higher level than mine. Because shame to admit it, you might be a better Fire Emblem player than me. I'm painfully average at this game.
I'm not going to confirm that, but I will say I mostly agree with you on weapon durability. I think, especially for the lower end weapons like iron weapons, javelins, hand axes, that stuff, I think weapon durability is just a waste of time for most players at this point. You should, if you're able to refresh these weapons, especially in a game like this where you can just buy new weapons in Somniel, so you don't have any reasons to, like, there's no timing your armory or shop visits. There's no limited maps where you can't buy anything, from what we know at least. If you can always go back and buy stuff, then it's just tedium, like replacing your hand axes every time. It got a little bit better in the DS emblems where you could merge your like 3 use hand axes together, but at this point, just make them unlimited durability. Just make them a little more expensive if you have to, and that's all you need to do. And then that does make higher end weapons a bit tricky to balance. I think Fates is the only other game that really tried to balance that out a little bit by having them like assign like bad penalties. Like I think they cut your stats a little bit every time you use them, stuff like that. That was an interesting approach. It didn't really work very well for most weapon types, and it ended up making most players just use like forged bronze and iron weapons all game long, which is kind of funny to me. Or it made personal weapons really good because they couldn't break, but they were still really good. Things like Xander and Ryoma's weapons, or even Leo's weapons, were a bit too strong almost because of that. I mean, like you said, the game is a balancing nightmare, so I don't expect they'll be balancing this very well. I think honestly the best case scenario might just be every weapon is unlimited and then just go nuts, do whatever you want. Here's your unlimited use silver lance, have fun, I guess. Maybe they'll just be balanced by the fact that you have to get higher weapon ranks to use the higher end weapons, and that'll be it. I wouldn't necessarily hate that. There are cool things you can do in a game with weapon durability, but at this point, with the approach this game is taking, I'd be very surprised if they did anything sophisticated. And, for like one game, I'm fine with that. They can have another go at they're making a properly balanced weapon system in another one. But this, I think in this one, it's kind of a lost cause already. And that's okay. It's meant to be I don't want to say easy, but not a very complex kind of game. So this seems pretty perfect for it.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily if I agree with, maybe describing it as lack of complexity. Because I think in terms of the systems that are being put together here, I think the end result could lack complexity in terms of, because there's overpowered options, just do the overpowered option every time, might be the way it ends up. But from what I've seen of a lot of the systems here in terms of the emblem abilities and the brick mechanic and the terrain modification that you can do, there are so many interesting strategies and possibilities here that I don't necessarily agree with maybe describing the overall game as lacking complexity.
Okay, I think that's fair. Maybe the way I should have worded it is that this part is not going to be very complex. Maybe the focus, the complexity might be elsewhere.
Yeah, it's not in the weapon system, I don't think. I do agree with the idea that this game is really saying just, like, go wild.
Mm-hmm.
This is with the player phase and the tools they're giving you, this game is screaming at you to just go wild and do what you want and really express yourself. We'll see how it actually plays out. I personally can't wait to see what tactics and I can't wait to see the ways people break this game.
Yeah,
I can't wait. I want to see how people use these systems and just explode this game. It happens eventually with most Fire Emblem games, is people find a way to just unravel it.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I gotta add one more quick thought that came to my head. The alternative to like infinite durability would probably be limited durability, but some way to repair your weapons in Somniel, right? Which would probably involve doing a bunch of push-ups or some kind of mini game where you're like smithing your weapons or whatever, like press A at the right time to repair your weapon. If this means skipping all that, I'm all for it. Like just give me unlimited weapons instead. I don't need more mini games.
Yeah, it's one less thing to worry about in a game that probably is gonna have a decent amount of management already. I don't mind them cutting this out in terms of a management element. I guess that's actually a good segue into talking about the Somniel. I heard a lot of previewers mention the Somniel was very skippable in terms of you did not have to interact with it if you did not want to. It didn't force you into it like the monastery in terms of like sitting on a 50-year loading screen and then you're in the monastery and then, and then you have to do monastery stuff for a while. A lot of the previewers emphasized its skippability. I'm interested to see how that plays out in the longer run. There's a lot of management that is in the Somniel that I feel like eventually at some point you have to interact with anyway.
Thoughts exactly.
Like there's a lot of core systems that you need to work with there. But I don't mind that necessarily if it means I'm not forced to interact with it every single chapter like I was with Three Houses. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that as well.
I think I'm mostly in agreement. For me, the approach of Fire Emblem is the less stuff you have to do between battles, the better. Options are good, but if the option is either I spend 10 minutes micromanaging to get better options in battle, or don't spend the time, I'd rather just have the options without having to spend the time. That sounds greedy maybe, but I don't know. I thought Fire Emblem was better when it was designed around not spending time between battles. You could... Like, what I'm worried about when they say skippable is like, yeah, I didn't have to like I did with the monastery, but what if it's like my castle in Fates where you can get some serious battle advantages from doing the things, and then not doing things leaves you a little bit disadvantaged? And what does that say about how designed the game is around using those features? That's what concerns me a little bit. Like, for example, in Fates, there was a feature in my castle where you could cook a meal, and then your characters would get like a +2 stat boost to maybe strength, speed, or defense. That's a huge difference if you don't do it. So yeah, technically you can skip it, but you're pretty much leaving yourself out of a pretty big advantage if you're not doing it. And that's the vibe I'm getting from Somniel, is it's that kind of mini games. Like, we already know there are some activities that boost your stats. I really would rather skip those activities and then, I don't know, either design the battles around me not having the stat points, or give me the stat boost for free to just hand out whatever way I want. Kind of like bonus experience, for example. That's a much better between battle system for me. I much prefer the games designed around something like that. That might sound like I'm complaining too much in advance about how it's going to be, but that's just kind of the things that come to mind when I hear it. I guess it leaves open the door for a challenge run where you just don't use Somniel at all. I guess that could be interesting. Hopefully that's possible and viable. Hopefully you don't need to optimize my castle. Because you already know that, like, you talked about like how people are going to break the game.
Yeah.
There's going to be something like where you build up a support super fast by doing push-ups with someone for like 50 hours and then you have like an S support by chapter 2 and you just steamroll the game. Something like that might be possible. I'd rather that not be possible, personally.
Yeah, it really is a design dilemma or identity dilemma with Fire Emblem. The more you have stuff like this, I think it started really with My Castle. My Castle proceeding into Monastery, proceeding into Somniel in terms of new game features. Where the thing is with all these side activities, once you introduce them, is you can't make them do nothing. Because if they do nothing, then they do nothing. There's no motive to go into them. So you make them do something. All right, they give a stat boost. They give a tangible reward. They give you something. Well, now, if you don't do the thing, like you're saying, you don't get that reward, you don't get that boost. And, some rewards are skippable or of a skippable nature, or some rewards are just too good to not pass up, like you're saying. So the more activities and side things you add, the more stuff that some players who don't want to interact with that. And it is, I'd say, I don't know, it's hard to get a grasp on Fire Emblem player types, especially when you're making content. You're kind of always hearing from a certain subset of players, and there's millions of people who play Fire Emblem now. So a lot of people really enjoy those casual elements, and you just never hear from them because they just buy and play the game and never talk about it online. Like, there's a lot of people like that with Fire Emblem. There's millions of people who play this game now. And it means that, like, I don't know, more classical or hardcore, the elitists,
Gamers.
Yeah, the people who perform more tactics streamlined experience where it's just battle with a bit of management in between. Those fans are, they are kind of forced to interact with systems that they're not necessarily. They're forced to do push-ups. Okay, they needed. They got to work out, and it leads to an interesting, I guess, identity clash in that way. But I think most players will probably be more than fine with this. But I can see how some players would not, and they just want to do some tactics, man. Like they don't want to do push-ups or feed a dog or, adopt a donkey or adopt a pigeon on a bridge. Like you can do that in this game. You can adopt pigeons.
Yeah, like after you finish a battle, you can go around the battlefield and collect animals.
Cool feature. Honestly, I like that. Honestly, I'm not digging that. But I'm saying there's people who like that don't care. They're not into that. They just want to fight. And the more of these features that there are, and there are a lot of them. This game has a lot of content, and a lot of it is not in the battles. A lot of it is outside of it and surrounding them. So players, there might be a few players who are a bit alienated by that.
Yeah. And on the other hand, there's actually people, and I've seen this unironic take somewhere, that someone was like, I really enjoyed the monastery stuff, but I didn't like all the battling in between. Like that exists too,
Yeah.
That Fire Emblem is like a very dual game in that way now.
Yeah, it's a kind of a game in two worlds, especially with Three Houses. Like Three Houses, again, it was the best-selling Fire Emblem game of all time. Like, there's a huge section of the fan base who that is Fire Emblem to them, and it'll be interesting to see how they evolve this. If this truly becomes a series staple, built off of the back of the success of, well, both Fates and Three Houses. Fates was a successful game as well in terms of sales, so. And maybe it's jumping the gun a bit already talking about the future of Fire Emblem when Engage hasn't even come out yet, but but I'm interested to see, some things we thought would be staples from maybe Awakening didn't end up being staples. Like, I don't know, pair-ups nowhere to be seen, although it's an interesting pair-up maybe is a new way for Engage as a form of
I feel like
pair-up.
Engage is the replacement for pair-up, yeah.
And honestly, I prefer, well, we'll see, I'll have to play with it, but Engage, I think, the Engage system seems like a more interesting thing than pair-up to me. But we'll see how it plays out.
It is nice that it doesn't turn units into backpacks, right? It actually has a separate mechanic for it. I like it way more than Adjutants too.
Yeah.
At least in concept.
But yeah, it's interesting to think about, all right, is this Fire Emblem now? In terms of, like, Monastery plus gameplay? Or is this just another kind of phase the series is in before it moves on to something else? Like, it always seems to do that at some point. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say it's not Fire Emblem. It'll look like hella elitist if I say that, but Yeah, it is. I guess I can't until it isn't anymore. It is. So this is just what the game is like. This is the type of game that people are attracted to, whether someone likes that or not. Some people buy the game for these features, for this kind of content. You know, more power to them. And you know, there's like older games that are not like this that didn't sell well. Obviously, that doesn't translate one-to-one to people not wanting those features because those games were also not marketed as well. So it's really hard to draw a comparison there. But for now, this is what Fire Emblem is. It's a fusion between some kind of slice of life simulation, some kind of like, I don't want to say waifu sim because that sounds so like I'm talking down to people, but to some people that is the appeal of it. That's what a significant portion of people want from the fan base, and it's what they keep putting out since Awakening, basically. So I guess it is what Fire Emblem is to some extent.
Alright, so we covered a lot of ground in that conversation. I think to summarize my thoughts, and I guess link back to at the beginning, I can't wait to play this game. I want to play it so bad. I'm really excited for it. I want to get my hands on these systems. I'm one of the people who likes the art direction and character designs. I'm also, we talked about it, I guess, in a different light during this conversation, but I also am someone who's excited for the Somniel features as well. I want to dive into those too. This looks like a game I can really lose myself in, and I can't wait to see how the systems interact, how it plays, and I'm just glad there's a new Fire Emblem, and I can't wait to play it. I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm also super anxious to play it. I think even if there's features that I might be a little bit harsh on throughout the past hour, I'm still super excited to try them for the first time, because if you're doing something for the first time, it's almost always funny to see what happens when you do that thing, even if it's a feature in the Somniel that I don't particularly care about. Like I said, it's kind of like what I said before. If using an iron weapon somewhere is fun for the first time, then you're gonna have a good time with your first time, and I'm ready to do that. When I'm playing through this for the first time, I'm just gonna let myself go and be like, all right, there's time to be critical later, but for now I'm just gonna enjoy myself and try out everything that the game gives me. See if I enjoy it. I might learn something new, I might enjoy something new, and just there's also something like playing a Fire Emblem game for the first time is always good, because Fire Emblem is so good. Like the core system is so satisfying that if you're playing something new, you're gonna have a good time, and that's the way I'm gonna approach this personally, and I can't wait until we're 2 weeks from now. It's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah, I think that approach is the best approach. Open mind. Fire Emblem's always good on a base level. Have fun with it. Anyways, I think that's gonna wrap up this conversation. We've been going for about an hour or so, probably edited down to a bit less, but thanks Mekkah for hopping on, having a discussion. This was a lot of fun. I hope the people at home enjoyed it too. But yeah, thanks for hopping on, Mekkah.
Thank you for having me.
If you haven't already, check out Mekkah, link in the description. I'm sure you're gonna be going hard on the Engage content, or at least
yes,
like you said, let's playing it, putting up content. I'm gonna keep up putting content, so you want to subscribe to me. You know, there's buttons also down there for that too, okay? Have a good one, everybody. Enjoy Engage.
Peace.